So, on November 3rd of 2009, Dragon Age Origins was released. It's a dark heroic fantasy RPG by BioWare set in the world of Thedas, where you play as a member of this kind of elite army where you protect the world from the Blight. It was met with critical acclaim, with people praising the story, the characters, and, while I don't think it's aged as well, the combat. Dragon Age Origins also allowed you to pick between 3 options for races of either human, dwarf, or elf, and you had 3 class options of warrior, mage, and rogue. But the big thing about character creation alongside all of this is the different origins based on your race and class, and there are 6 to choose from. These character creation options weren't just there to give you a racial bonus or passive traits, and the class options weren't just there to change the gameplay style. It was the first game I remember playing where I can safely say that my choices mattered. My background in class would give me a different experience of the game, and it would give me different dialogue options as well. The mage class in particular would also allow me to partake in one quest differently than the other 2 classes, and it would also passively alter my perception of who I would want to help and who I would side with more. Added with the fact that the choices I made in this game was carried over into Dragon Age 2, and likewise choices made in that game were also carried over into Dragon Age Inquisition, this at the time was the best RPG experience I have ever had growing up. This, however, was 14 years ago. When we hear that our choices matter in a video game, we might begin to think that it'll probably affect 1 or 2 details. There's a sort of veil covering the whole thing. We have to suspend our disbelief to not just see it as a superficial choice that has no real outcome or effect on the overall story. Going back to Dragon Age as an example, you could kill a certain party member and they would still appear in subsequent games with only a bit of dialogue as to why they're back. Likewise, the endings to Inquisition may not have as drastic of an effect on Dragon Age Dreadwolf and may also receive only a few lines of dialogue, though at this time it remains to be seen. And on one hand, I can understand why. Some people might not care much for these changes and just want the gameplay, and if there's a possibility you'd be locked out of items, armor, party members, or anything that can improve your game, it would be seen more as a negative. With video games, a good story is nothing if the gameplay isn't there. On the other hand though, this illusion of choices matter is just that, and seeing past the veil, especially if it's something so narrative driven with player dialogue, can make the person realize how shallow of an experience this really is. This brings me to Baldur's Gate 3. Currently one of the top rated games on Steam, and I have not finished it yet, so no spoilers. But this game has captured the feeling I had when I first played Dragon Age Origins. I played the early access when they had only about 6 classes and gnomes were still not a playable race, and the amount that they had for the early access was just absolutely wild. I believe right before release it was about half the size of what the game is, and there was like 20 hours of content for early access for just Act 1 alone. And now there's still so much more I have yet to see. I knew that your race would affect dialogue, and your class would alter things as well, either making rolls easier by giving you advantage, or even just to give you that roleplay feel where you actually feel like you are the class that you picked. I tried out a few races and classes to see what the experience would be like, and was pleasantly surprised to see that if I were to say, make myself a drow, I would see different responses from others as opposed to being a high elf, for example. And I know class options also matter for dialogue, and how you approach them matters. I played a warlock in the early access, and after finding Shadowheart's pod on the Nautiloid, I can determine the runes and magic to unlock it without needing the key. A wizard can also do this, and I would assume a sorcerer. I didn't try that yet. When I played as a barbarian, I was shown that I could just rip the pod open and get her out of there, and these minor details helped shape my experience alongside all the other various roar dialogue options that barbarians get. And there's so many roar options. A friend of mine had dialogue where they were both a tiefling and a druid in the druid grove, and that seemed really cool that there was a race class dialogue, and now I wonder, are there race class dialogues for drow ranger? Do I want to find out? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think I want to be drizzed. It's funny enough that when I was going to start my first actual playthrough, I had so many choices that I knew would affect my interactions one way or another that I ended up having choice paralysis. Having multiple concurrent playthroughs right now, each one ends up feeling very different. In one, I'm a human barbarian, in another, I'm a half-orc rogue, in another, I'm a Githyanki oathbreaker, and in my last one, I'm a half-elf paladin warlock. Trying out all these things, and each one just feels so different from the last, even though I'm going through the same quest and the same adventure, but it just feels so different. And knowing that an average playthrough would take about 70 to 100 hours with various branching paths, I'm here for a while just because I want to see everything. One thing I'm amazed about is the fact that there's a whole evil playthrough of the game. In Act 1, you learn about a few things involving the new druid leader Kaga, and she wants to get rid of the tieflings. The tieflings can't leave because of a goblin group nearby that'll actually kill them, and you learn that they're in this cult for the Absolute, a goddess that they worship, the goblins, not the tieflings. On top of that, the actual leader of the druid group is captured by the goblins in this cult, and you're asked to go free him because he can potentially heal your mind flayer problem, and also it'll just help the tieflings in general. So now we have some choices. Do we decide to fuck over the tieflings and tell them to get out? Do you help the tieflings and rescue the druid as well? Or do you fuck over not just the tieflings but also the druids and have the druids kill the tieflings? Or do you side with the cult and go along with whatever it is that they want? My first time playing, I thought that there really is just one right path to take, and that it was to rescue Halsin and to kill the goblin leaders, and then I saw screenshots of later parts of the game where people I've killed are still alive and came to realize that there's just a whole other side to the game that I've not really known about and I want to experience. How different will it actually be? I don't know, but the mysticism is there, and it's either going to shatter before me or give me what is essentially just another game. The last time I remember playing a game that had a good and evil option was Infamous on the PlayStation 3. And in that game, you could decide between being a hero or being a villain, and what it comes down to is affecting your outfit, color scheme, and it does affect what powers and abilities you can get, as well as some minor alterations like story and cutscenes. The world responds to your actions, but the story very much continues on the same path, regardless if you've done a hero playthrough or a villain playthrough. The endings sort of change, but nothing else really outside of the endings get affected as much. And oddly enough, the other time I remember playing a video game that had hero and villain options before this was, and you're not gonna believe this because it's going to sound like a fucking meme, but it was Shadow the Hedgehog. Shadow the Hedgehog had many paths to complete the levels, and by many, I mean about 3 at most. And they're based on whether he follows the dark path, the hero path, or the neutral path. And each one leads to another level, and there's a whole table that shows the progression of each level and where they end up. And to an even younger Kagi, this was more like, wow, cool. A lot of games that I played that list choice matters tend to have just very minor effects on the game and the story, and sometimes it's a cosmetic choice, and sometimes it provides one small bit of detail, and sometimes it just does nothing at all but makes you feel something for a few seconds, like you're just role-playing. To have my choices be more meaningful and impactful in such a way that I could have a different experience compared to others, not just in race and class choices, but also in the choices I make in the story, whether I fail or succeed in combat encounters, whether or not I succeed on these insight checks in dialogue. There is so much detail that Larian has put into Baldur's Gate 3, and it amazes me every single time that I'm always finding something new. What happens if you do betray the druids? What happens if you side with the Absolute? What happens if the inn you're at in Act 2 actually falls? This feeling that my choices matter make me not only feel like I can have a different experience, but it gives me the feeling that I'm helping to write the story. It makes sense for Baldur's Gate, right? I mean, it's based off of like Dungeons & Dragons, and that is a very player-driven narrative experience, unless you like the more combat side of things. The sense and feeling of freedom that you have is amazing, and I only hope to see even but a fraction of this in other games that claim that your choices matter. Anyway, I just been rambling on this video. I just wanted to talk about this because I just felt that it was just kind of cool to actually have this many options, and everything just feels sort of different from dialogue that I have and ways to complete quests. I think this is just very refreshing to have, especially given previous games that I've played. Anyway, I've been rambling on for a while. I'm gonna go, and remember that I appreciate you.